Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome to our Water Wednesday webinar. I'll give everyone another 30 seconds to get into the meeting, and then we'll go ahead and kick it off.
And just tell me when you want me to share.
Yeah, of course. Feel free to start sharing now. That way it'll just be so
Okay.
smooth. Okay. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Water Wednesday webinar titled Protect, Conserve, Beautify, Firescaping Your Waterwise Garden. My name is Geneva Gondak, and I'm a supervisor of water conservation at East Bay Mud, and I'll be your host tonight. As we approach what has become to be known as fire season, it's more important than ever to ensure that we're doing what we can to make our homes and our landscapes fire resilient. We want you to leave this webinar feeling informed and confident about what you can do at home to mitigate fire risk, while still ensuring that you have a water-wise, sustainable landscape. But before we get started, I'm going to go through a few quick housekeeping notes. First off, this webinar is being recorded, and by participating, you are agreeing to be part of a recorded webinar. The recording will be made available next week on our website at ebmud.com/Water Wednesday. You can also visit that same webpage to see any past Water Wednesday webinars, like our prior March webinar, which focused more broadly on wildfire preparedness and what East Bay Mud is doing. Throughout tonight's webinar, you can submit any questions using the Q&A function. We'll try to get to as many as we can in our jam-packed webinar, and my colleague Catherine and I will try to answer some simple ones as well as the webinar progresses. However, we'll have some time at the very end for Doug to actually answer questions live. Also, a small disclaimer, East Bay Mud, of course, is a very large water utility, and our service area includes 20 cities and 15 unincorporated areas. Thus, tonight we will not be speaking directly to fire rules, regulations, and code, but instead just focused on general best practices. So for any specific regulations or local concerns, please check with your local jurisdiction and fire code. With that, we're super excited tonight to have renowned ecological landscape designer, author, and firescaping expert, Douglas Kent, as our guest speaker. Doug started landscaping for fire protection in Mill Valley back in the early 1990s in the aftermath of the tunnel fire, which happened in 1991. Since then, he's visited the aftermath of many of our state's largest fire calamities, and through the years has taken these learnings to write his best-selling book on fire protection called Firescaping, and authored many other articles as well. He also manages a small firm and works with private property owners, HOAs, cities, utilities, and nonprofits across California on this work. Doug's work has appeared in many publications like the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, NPR, Pacific Horticulture, and more. He's also the author of 6 other books on sustainable landscaping. So he has more knowledge than just firescaping, but it has actually really been focused on resilient landscapes for many, many years. Doug also teaches at UCLA Extension of Horticulture Design and USC's School of Architecture and Urbanism, and his work can be viewed on his website at enfractus.com. So with that, we'll dive in, and I'll hand it over to Doug to take it from here.
Thank you, Geneva. Well, welcome. I'm just going to start this presentation with a quick note of appreciation. So on behalf of East Bay Municipal Utility Water Districts and myself, thank you for showing up. Thank you for caring about your family, your neighbors, and your community, and only you can save yourself. And in doing so, you might save your neighbors and your community. So I just want to make sure that you know that you are appreciated, you are respected, you are honored, and we are just so glad that you showed up tonight. So enough gushiness, time to move on to brass tacks. Nothing is getting better in California. Nothing is getting better. What I did here is I took the 30 worst fires in California based on structural loss and put them in an Excel sheet and looked for a trend. And you can see that fire destruction has been trending upwards since the very first urban wildland fire, the Oakland-Berkeley 1923 fire. And since the year 2000s, the early 2000s, things have accelerated, and then they jumped exponentially after 2015, where we've experienced some of the most horrendous tragedies nothing is getting better in California. And this is why it's so essential that we all show up for our families, our properties, and our communities. And the thing that I've learned in my 33 years of firescaping throughout California is building fire resistance is easy. We know how to do it. The trick is sustaining that resistance. Not one California mission was ever lost to a wildfire. We knew what to do in the 1700s. And it's not the new structures that are being lost, it's the aging structures. The trick is maintaining fire resistance. And this picture highlights the problems that we have in California. This is 9 years after a rebuild, and you can see risk growing on this property, vegetation growing up underneath the eaves, flash fuels. Highly ignitable fuels in the front yard, restricted access and vegetation right up, dense vegetation right up against the structure. This is what we need to manage in fire country in California. And one of the greatest quotes I have ever read for fire country, the most meaningful thing is the serenity prayer. And if you're old like myself, you have run into this serenity prayer either through yourself or through a family member. And it is so powerful because it reminds us to control what we can in fire country. So I'm just going to read this. God, and this is non-denominational, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, like the climate and fire weather, the courage to change the things I can, like my structure, and the wisdom to know the difference. I took this picture in Altadena. This home survived with a car burning right next to it within 6 feet. And that car would have been burning at 1800 degrees. This is the power of manifesting what we can control and taking the reins of that control, that agency. So I'm just going to make this really brief. This is only 37 slides tonight. I'm going to talk about structures, small properties, the first 5 feet, landscape features, plants, and then just a 2-slide conclusion. So structures, oh my God, this is the place to start. And we know this. Fire after fire after fire, your home is more likely to be inflamed than a firebrand than direct flame contact. And you can see this in this picture and the pictures that follow. The bottom picture is the Woolsey fire in Malibu, and there's not a flame in this valley. This one home is ablaze, and it was ablaze by a firebrand that blew up and over that ridge in those Santa Ana winds, and it ignited. The top right picture is an excellent example of a fire-hardened structure and its ability to repel uh, direct flames. Flames were lashing at that structure within 3 feet, and it held its ground because of its impeccable maintenance and care. Start with the heart and work outwards. So some of the key characteristics of a protected property, and I'll just go clockwise here, is always have your address out in front. If you want an emergency response, the first responders need to be able to call in exactly your address. So make sure that your address is visible both on the structure and on the street. All openings must be screened by no less than 1/8 inch metal mesh. So that's the air vents underneath the eaves. Those are the air vents on the top of the roof, and even any kind of outlet that you have coming out of the structure, like that the dryer hose coming out. You really need to protect any kind of entry point with no less than 1/8 inch metal mesh. And there's all kinds of gadgets out now that will help you protect the interior home from firebrand attack. Naturally, you want the most fire resistant roofing possible, which is the only one that is allowed in California now, the Class A. Importantly, you really want to clean out your gutters. Any kind of debris in gutters during a Diablo wind event can ignite, and it could ignite the rafters, the beams, or the post as a consequence. One of the most vulnerable places of a structure is the eaves, because as the big winds drive those heat and firebrands up underneath the roof, it accumulates, and that heat will eventually ignite the eaves. So care must be taken to make sure that those eaves are well painted. There's nothing to ignite, even a bird nest, which is common. Underneath eaves, you really want double pane windows or thermal pane windows to make sure that radiant heat doesn't penetrate the structure. Non-flammable siding throughout the entire building, and this doesn't mean it has to be stucco or metal or concrete. I've seen plenty of wood structures survive conflagrations as long as when those firebrands hit it, they hit and drop, hit and drop. There's nothing for those firebrands to stick to on the structure. Really want to make sure that any of the vegetation surrounding the large vegetation surrounding the structure is just a little off. You want 10 feet above the roof line and, preferably 10 feet off the building itself. And these vegetation is impeccably well maintained. Great access around the structure so emergency responders can really dash around your property, putting out any spot fires that occur. All appendages that attach to the building, like steps and decks, are all made with fire-resistant materials, and if wood, 1 hour fire-resistant rating. If you have, which is very common in the Bay Area, decks that overhang the structure, you're going to skirt them. So you're just going to take gypsum board or some material, non-flammable material, from the top of the deck all the way down to the soil, and that would stop those firebrands and that intense heat from igniting the underside of those features. And then here, just make sure that we store all gear and all stuff off the structure. So compost and trash cans. I can't tell you what a big liability trash cans are, but we really want to store that stuff off the structure and reduce the ignitability of that structure. Small lot properties. These are the largest calamities in California's history. The top left photo is the tunnel fire of 1991. As you know, PSTD is still rife in that region from that horrific event. 2,900 structures lost, 25 lives lost, all in just 10 hours. That fire was pushed downhill by both the Diablo winds and radiant heat. The heat from a burning building can get up to about 2,000 degrees, which is enough to ignite anything within 15 feet of it. When one house goes, they all go like dominoes. Picture to the bottom left is Paradise, the campfire. This really wasn't a woodland fire. It really wasn't a forest fire. It burnt trees, but only the most vulnerable trees. If it was an adolescent tree or a healthy adult, it withstood the lash. This was an urban conflagration. And again, these homes, some of them were poorly maintained, and they were so close together that it was inflammation through radiation. Just the heartbreak of the Tubbs fire in 2017. Again, once that fire got into the urban core, it was inflammation through radiation. And this picture to the top right really highlights the phenomenon here. This is the old fire of 2003 in San Bernardino. To the left of this picture is all blue gum eucalyptus. None of those trees even bothered to ignite. What happened is one of these houses wasn't defensible against firebrands. It ignited and set the entire block ablaze. It just ran down the street like dominoes. If you live in a small lot environment, there's a lot of things you can do. First and foremost, most important thing you can do is put a non-flammable fence in between the properties. Really, ideally, this would be a stucco wall. I mean, a cinder block wall or a slump wall, because that thick concrete can actually absorb that radiant heat without radiating it back out. Whereas a metal fence actually transmits that radiant heat pretty well. So you really want this non-flammable, dense barrier in between the structures, just in case your neighbor did go ablaze. Importantly, is if we learned from the tunnel fire, the Tubbs fire, and even the campfire, we really want multiple ways off the property. These events can happen so fast right now, especially as we saw in Altadena, where people just can't get off their property fast enough. And we really need to create some more porosity on our properties and give people multiple access routes or escape routes. 3, share vegetation. Sometimes I'm convinced Californians don't like their neighbors, and we just plant both sides of our fences with this thick, dense vegetation, which endangers both properties. And if we can just bring over a plate of cookies to our neighbor and maybe negotiate the care of shared vegetation. You really want the most fire resistant and fire retardant plant materials on these small lot properties because you're going to get bombarded for hours or days or sometimes even weeks, as in the case of the Tubbs fire. Just firebrands are going to be landing on, and we really want the most fire resistant plant material in these small lots. If possible, off-street parking. What's happening in California is these roads were built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, but the densification of California has been slowly rising throughout. And these roads just weren't designed to handle the massive cars that they're now experiencing. And so creating off-street parking allows that two-way traffic, that fleeing and fighting during those critical moments. And then pools, maybe Geneva can weigh on this, but I found pools were a really nice asset to have on small lot properties. Not only did they provide emergency water during a conflagration, you could throw your stored items in there. Um, but they're also good for earthquakes. We are an earthquake company, and they might become a community asset during any type of emergency situation. So when you combine all those things and your whole street does that, you have a good chance of being resilient against this inflammation through radiation. So whether you're rich or poor, homeowner or renter, and I'm going to say renters because in Altadena, 50% of the people that lost their homes were renters. 70% in Paradise were renters. We need to speak to everybody in fire country. So rich or poor, homeowner or renter, there's things that we can all do. One, get your most disposable family member up on the roof and start checking your screen. Bay Area folks, you are influenced by maritime air, and that salty air will corrode the screens underneath your eaves. Get somebody up there to actually physically poke at them to make sure that they're in good shape. Paint and clean the eaves. I cannot tell you how vulnerable eaves are. They are one of the most vulnerable parts of your structure. Clean your roof and gutters, as I mentioned. Gutters start, ignite, you got to fire up the rafters, across the beams, and down the post. Manage your seams and fill your gaps like this picture to the right. This is a firebrand trap. If this was my house, I would just take a power washer, knock that paint right off, get some silicone, fill that gap, and just paint it with a primer. Just as long as that wood surface, when those firebrands hit, there's nothing for it to attach to. And then please, for any emergency year long, make sure that your address is visible. Renter or homeowner, we need to do this. Now, defensible space. This is the area from the structure 30 feet out. Now, statistics show that if you have a fire hardened structure in just 30 feet of defensible space, you have a 90% plus chance of survival. That's it. And that's all this presentation is focus on is fire hardening in that first 30 feet. But before we get into the rest of the 30 feet, we really need to talk about the first 5 feet. What happens with the first 5 feet is flame lengths double against a vertical surface. Let me just give you an example. If we had a grass fire out in the open and it was 3 feet tall, we would have radiant heat going in every direction. We take that same fire, that same 3 feet, and put it up against a vertical surface. Well, that radiant heat no longer has any place to go. So it compresses and it builds. And then all of a sudden, convective processes kick in and hot air just rushes up this vertical surface. And as that hot air goes, it takes the flame with it. So what would be a 3 foot flame in the open is now a 6 to 10 foot flame up against a vertical surface. And it's illustrated really well in this picture from the Eaton fire. The boxwoods hedges ignited, produced what should have been only 4 or 5 foot flames, and they produced 9 or 10 foot flames. They had just begun to ignite the eaves of this house. You can see the blistering paint here. And I think a neighbor ran over with just a garden hose and put this out. Thank goodness this house would have been lost. But the lessons are poignant. We all know now, no woody, dry mulches up against the structure. That's a kindling. That's how we start a fire. Avoid any kind of storage. I would even recommend removing trash cans from a structure. As I saw in Altadena, what was happening in those 70-mile-an-hour winds is the lids of the trash cans were flying open, the firebrands coming into the trash cans, igniting the contents. And because the The fire was hemmed in on four sides. It was producing these tunnel-like flames that were then catching the eaves on fire. Absolutely no flammable plants, no boxwood, no sheared hedges up against the house. Avoid erecting any shading device or attaching any shading device directly to the structure. And then do not attach anything flammable. Again, as shown as this picture, all they needed to do was take this one little 4-foot section and make it metal, and they would have greatly reduced their liability. That said, there is a big argument now on what can be in that 5 feet, and I argue for a little bit vegetation. I know this may be a little controversial, but this picture was taken in the aftermath of the Justista fire in Santa Barbara. And it was just a wind-whipped fire that destroyed hundreds of structures. And this structure survived with vegetation up against it. Vegetation up against a structure can rob the atmosphere of firebrands and heat. I have seen this throughout the state. It can cool a structure and landscape, reducing indoor energy cost, ultimately bringing down the temperature of the planet. It can screen particulates and gulp oxides. It can protect the occupants of the house. It can pull moisture away from the structure, extending its longevity, and it can provide vegetation, importantly, provides nutrition, care, and joy. It gives us a sense of purpose. And here's some good examples. All three are from Santa Barbara. This house on the upper right survived the Justista fire. And you can just see they didn't have anything up against the structure that was remotely flammable. So as it was getting pummeled by the firebrands, there was just nothing to ignite. A wooden old structure survived that. This is just another good example from Santa Barbara. Excellent 5 feet, impeccable maintenance, wonderful siding, has all the characteristics of fire protection. And then here is if I was doing a design, this is maybe something I would look at. And definitely using pebbles or gravel or some kind of inorganic mulch up against the structure. When it comes to 5 feet, just take a look at this picture. Just pause for a second and see if you see the danger. I've seen this throughout the state. You can regulate nothing against the house, all you want, and these transient fuels will always show up because humans are humans. We're going to get out of our car, we're going to offload it, and we're going to run into the house and handle what other emergency we have going on. This pile of wood gravely endangers this structure. And you can see that the flashing right at the roof line is starting to bow out a little bit, creating an entry point for those flames, which up against that vertical surface will definitely reach that flashing. And the tragedy here, the fix is so easy. Just move that stuff off the structure. If it burns, it's fine. It doesn't have to take down the home. And the problem with this home, this was taken in the Santa Ana foothills, is that it's only 20 feet from the nearby home. This could be a dominoes thing, and really it's just basic housekeeping. So you can either move that stuff into the garage or just push it up against the fence or just push it into the back of the garden. Again, we can't stop all fires. We're really concentrating on protecting our home and our family. The next thing of all the group of plants, of all the fires I have gone to, this is the group of plants most likely to go in a conflagration. Sheared hedges just are the first to ignite. And the reason being their interiors are comprised of fine and dead leaves, and there's an abundance of fine twigs, and they burn from the inside out. And they're really difficult to extinguish because you have this canopy of green leaves protecting the interior. So it's really tough to get to the water. I took this picture in Altadena. This hedge ignited, burnt from the interior out, and took the fire and brought it right to the structure. So had it not been for this hedge, the house to the right would have suffered absolutely no damage. Hedges are perilous. And here's just some other examples from Altadena. This would have been a site, the picture to the left. And you can see the Italian cypress, overaged, full of dense, twiggy interiors, just contributing firebrands to the community a mile downwind. But there's a lot of things we can do because privacy and boundaries are important. They're human needs. We're going to need borders and horticultural borders in our communities. So there's a lot of things that we can do. One, stop shearing the plant. Shearing is just the laziest way to care for vegetation. We need artful pruning. So we're pruning from the interior outwards and then nipping, just tipping the soaring stems. We're going to ensure proper leaf moisture, as I saw in tubs, Altadena, Palisades, Paradise. If we don't get any winter moisture from the atmosphere, we're going to have to apply that around our homes. It's okay if the wildlands starve. It is not okay if vegetation within this 30 feet is water stressed during a Diablo or Santa Ana event. So as a rule, I just never let my plants and those of my clients dry between 3 to 4 inches. So when it dries to about this deep, I'll just really water it and then let it dry to that depth again, which means I'm watering about once every 2 to 3 weeks in winter if we're not getting those the rainfall. And then if you ever have to replace a hedge, really you want to replace something with big, supple leaves, tolerates a range of growing conditions, maybe more acidity and more nutrients, which are common in urban areas. And then it responds well to this artful pruning instead of the hedge pruning. This is a picture I took in Pasadena, and this is a grevillea hedge that was so artfully pruned. You can see that it has green materials throughout the entire length of it. There's no dead material accumulated, no um, leafy debris that is accumulated. And this is really, a horticulturalist has cared, somebody who has cared, has taken care of this hedge, and it performs all the functions of a regular hedge without the danger. There's a lot of hedge alternatives, arbutus, even bamboo does well, surprisingly to most people. Camellias, citrus, ficus, there's all kinds of hedges that you can use. I took this picture in Altadena. This hedge survived the conflagration with all the homes burning around it. And I was so surprised. I really stuck my head into the interior of this hedge to find out, how did it do it? And when I took this picture, I knew instantly how I did it. Somebody that cared took care of this hedge. They prune from the inside out. You can see that there's green leaves along the entire stem of this plant, creating fire resistance. There's nothing fine for a firebrand to ignite, and that's what a firebrand needs. It needs that something bigger to take that small, tiny flame to make it a bigger flame, and then that flame grows and grows, and there was just nothing. This took out that link to the greater, bigger fire. Again, care, attention, and good horticultural practices saved this hedge. And in a way, this hedge took out energy, reduced wind speeds, and reduced the number of firebrands downwind of it. It actually provided a degree of protection. Oh boy, one of the biggest liabilities I've seen in fire country is shade structures. We have a warming world. We need outdoor living, and shade structures are growing throughout our state. I took this photo after the 2008 Freeway Complex fire. Hundreds of structures were destroyed in Roland Heights and Berea. And so I went to the edges to find out what was going on in this fire zone. And I ran into this all over. And this was an unpermitted shade structure that was built with substandard materials. The 1x2 slats is not legal in any kind of high fire hazard area. And most egregiously, it's attached to a structure underneath that overhang. And it's poorly maintained with peeling paint. A firebrand will stick to those small slats, will ignite those small slats, could ignite the rafters from that overhang, penetrate the structure, and if that house goes, it is only 10 feet from the neighboring house. This is just a tragedy that this one person who valued their family and outdoor living could endanger the entire block like this. There's a lot of BMPs, best management practices for shade structures. One, keep it off the structure by 5 feet. I know places in LA County say you can't have a shade structure any closer than 10 feet if you're in an extra high fire hazard area. Your building materials are going to be the most fire resistant. If you're using wood, it will have a 1 hour fire resistant rating. You want nothing remotely flammable around it. So no flash fuels. Everything is well cared for and irrigated. And you regularly maintain these materials just to ensure that when those firebrands hit, they drop. Firebrands hit and they drop. I've seen loads of shade structures survive when the houses haven't. Just care and attention is the thing we need in fire country. Cal Fire is notorious for calling fences freeways for fire, and they are. Uh, Fences are how fires travel in between properties. That's the 405 or the 580 that they take to move around their community. In Altadena, it was hard to tell where one property started and stopped. It was just ridiculous. Yeah, and you can see why. This was a neighboring surviving home, and this, actually, this is an older picture, but Italian cypress, dense, woody, twiggy, dead interior against a softwood fence that is poorly maintained and old. Yes, this is a tragedy waiting to happen. Loads of remedies again, and we've always known what to do. Change up materials, so metal, cinder block. You can go the old inexpensive route and just use wire and a really fire-resistant hedge with timber that has the 1 hour fire-resistant rating, in this case, redwood. We just need to get creative with our materials and get diligent and proactive with our maintenance when it comes to managing our borders with our neighbors. And then defensible space pathways. Boy, again, I can't emphasize, but being able to move through a property in any type of emergency is essential to the occupant's safety. It is also essential to the success of the emergency responders. If you hired me to do an assessment of your property, you and I would jog around your property to see if we could circumnavigate it and if we had a clear path that we could actually stand, that the emergency responders could take a stand and defend your property. So if I'm designing your home, I'm designing the paths around your garden is no less than 4 feet wide. Clear visibility. You want 25 feet of clear visibility. We don't want any surprises or anybody shocked when they're rounding a corner. All the vegetation on either side is non-flammable, so you're not endangering the emergency responders. Stable surface, so really no mulches. You really want DG or gravel or concrete or brick. If there are many steps, you really want a handrail because if you want emergency responders on your property, they're going to be hauling equipment around. So it's one hand for themselves and one hand for their gear. And then, especially in the Bay Area and the North Bay, where it gets a little wetter, Inverness, Bodega Bay, you really want a 2% cross slope. So the constant moisture is always sheeting off because if it's level, it will pond and you're going to get algae, which makes that walking surface really slippery. And these are just the characteristics, and I can't emphasize this enough. This is the very first fire I covered as a reporter for the Marin Independent Journal. This is the 1996 Mount Vision fire. I was only interviewing survivors. This is Miss Bayless. Her whole track was mostly destroyed, and she was the one survivor on her block. And when I interviewed her and the fire personnel sent to defend this home, they all said it was her system of paths. The firebrands, this really wasn't a heavy wind event. It was a canopy fire that was going across the Bishop Pines, and the firebrands were just raining straight down. And the emergency responders were just able to run around the structure and put out the little spot fires as they came. It really helped that she cared for her trees. She doted over them like one of her children. And when the fire hit her property, there really wasn't much dead material to ignite. So it was really this care and attention, this legacy thing that she wanted to give her grandchildren that ultimately saved her property. I think she's a hero. Just pause for a second. You see the danger, right? I'm like, who doesn't? That Mexican fan palm just leapt out, everybody. Everybody sees this throughout California, and I don't bring this up to bring up the obvious. I bring it up because we need teapots in fire country. We need people that will actually speak up. And I say that because 5 groups of people never said anything about this tree. And this tree is about 9 to 11 years old. It almost grows a rung a year. The 2 homeowners never said anything for 9 or 10 years. Their landscape contractors or maintenance crew never said anything. The HOA landscape committee never said anything. The HOA board of directors never said anything. And the Orange County Fire Authority never said anything. And this is where it needs something. If you see something, we must say something in defense of our properties and our neighborhoods. If you've ever seen a Mexican fan palm go with that much dead material, it looks like a Roman candle. It just starts exploding and firebrands and burning embers are going in every direction. And it's so hard to extinguish because those fronds lay over each other like roof tiles. So you can throw water on that, but it's really hard to get to the interior. So if you see something, say something. It's time to put your hands on your hip, throw your heel down, and pull the old teapot. We need to speak up. We need to be vocal about protection. So defensible space, whether you're rich or poor, homeowner or renter, there's things that we can do. First, remove all flammable stuff off of 5 feet. Get those woody mulches off, get the compost off, get the trash cans off if you can. Second, remove the dead, dying, and diseased vegetation. This is the kindling that the firebrands ignite. This is the stuff that turns a teeny little fire into something bigger. Properly manage your landscape features like fences and shading devices, play sets, any kind of flammable object that you have in your garden needs maintenance to be fire resistant. And then please do not let your plants dry out. Water starved, water stressed landscapes are endemic in California. I know we need to save water, but boy, oh boy, if we don't get that winter irrigation, winter is the time of year when every plant needs irrigation. They have evolved to accept it during that time of year. And if we do not get it, water, and it doesn't need much water because the days are so short. I'm watering my garden no more than once every 3 weeks during winter, but I'm maintaining the health of my landscape. And then plants. Everybody wants to get into plants, so let's get into it. But I put this at the very end for a good reason, and you'll see why. I just want to say this fire, this is the Orange Coast Keepers demonstration garden in the Santa Ana foothills. This has survived 2 wildfires without igniting. It just leaped over this demonstration garden in both those events. Knowing traits is more important than remembering plant list. So broadleaf plants are less flammable than conifers. Moist and easily bent leaves are less flammable than brittle leaves. So if you could take a leaf and twist it and it doesn't tear or break, it has a low degree of ignitability. Thick leaves are less flammable than thin and brittle leaves. Low amounts of litter is a less flammable plant. Sap that looks more like water. If you cut into an oak tree, any quercus, you're going to get a water-like sap. They are highly fire resistant. But if you cut into a pine tree or a cedar tree, you're going to get this pitch, this resin, and that resin is a little more combustible and flammable. Plants without a fragrance. Many Mediterranean plants add a sugar molecule to the water molecule because the oil takes a higher temperature to evaporate. So it's a water conservation strategy. And you'll find that a lot of Mediterranean plants are very fragrant. Unfortunately, this fragrance comes with a cost, and that cost is a higher degree of ignitability. Plants with silver or gray leaves are less flammable than green leaves, believe it or not. Silver or gray leaves, a lot of Mediterranean plants, again, have silver or gray leaves. And what it means is they're accepting more solar radiation than they can metabolize, and they're mirroring that radiation, that solar energy back into the atmosphere. And in order to get that gray look, they have to pull minerals up from the soil. They put it in their leaves, and any leaf with a high mineral content is going to be less flammable. And then plants without hair, it's called cilia. This is another Mediterranean climate adaptation. But a lot of Mediterranean plants have hair over their breathing apparatus, their stoma, and this protects water loss. So, when the California sycamore is in leaf, very hairy leaf on the underside, and they're more ignitable, little more ignitable. As a consequence, cowitch, Fremontia all have hairy leaves, and then deep rooted. Time and time again, I have seen deep rooted plants be able to survive periods of drought and water stress better than shallow rooted plants because they have access to this deeper moisture. Good example here is this is a bird of paradise. It survived without even producing a flame. I know it didn't produce a flame because there's no black tips here. So it absorbed all that heat, 1,500 degrees, without ever producing a flame. It was well loved, had care and attention, and it helped protect um, the downwind environments as a consequence. So if I'm designing your landscape, I'm going to prioritize just a little more water usage around the structure. I'm going to create a zone of care and fire retardants, where when those firebrands hit that intense heat, there's just nothing to ignite within this zone. And I'm going to use plants that care for you so you get out and care for them. And then as we move further from the structure, I'm going to reduce resource use and the amount of time in a garden. I'm going to design for more fire resistance. And this is where I'm really going to lean into more of the native plant palette and let them do their historic job of resisting the impacts of fire. There's a lot of plant lists I use, a lot of professional use, and they can all be fire resistant. So we can do a bird-friendly landscape or a food landscape, a medicine landscape, a pollinator landscape, public health landscapes, which is really actually essential given our public health metrics right now. Succulents, if well maintained, are highly fire resistant. Tropical, if you have source to a gray water. Boy, I'll tell you, tropical plants just brush off fire. Banana, avocado, mango, just shrug off fire. But you really need a source of water for that kind of stuff. If you're going to work with a California native plant palette, these are the three plant communities I have found that have been most effective. Naturally, the chaparral. This is a long-lived plant community, 40 to 50 years they live. California fuchsia, coffeeberry, island, mallow, oak, russes, toyon, lemonade berry, sugarbush are all phenomenal at resisting the impacts of fire. Desert, really until air pollution, the desert never had fire until the nitrogen oxides created the annual grasses, and they're highly fire resistant if cared for. And then woodland understory. So many urban environments are actually shaded by the house, shaded by large trees, and we really need plants that can tolerate half-day shade. And so this plant palette has worked really well for me throughout California. Columbine, coral bells, ferns, iris, ribes, Rosa, and then Viola, the plant of love. This photo is interesting. It shows the power of food. Food has been saving California for hundreds of years. This is a fire that in 2021 that was roaring down the Santa Ana riverbed, hit a 20-acre citrus farm and was stopped dead. This is the power of food, and the reason food is so impactful is not because of the plant itself, but because we are always caring for it because food cares for us. So it's a reciprocal relationship, and we all thrive in those type of relationships. However, I really don't promote plant lists. I don't. Every plant I just recommended, I've seen a pile of ash. Any plant that I would disrecommend, I've seen surviving. It's really hard to make sense of what you see when you tour fire areas. It's really hard to say one thing is going to save us all when you've seen just the opposite. Any plant that's too old, diseased, injured, pest infested, not healthy is going to be more ignitable, more combustible, and more flammable as a consequence. This is the bonfire. I showed this picture earlier. In fact, the reason I took this picture originally was because these are all California natives: toyon, lemonade berry, oak, and sycamore. And the reason they were set ablaze is because they were no maintenance. Even natives need maintenance. Even natives need care and attention to maintain that fire resistance. Don't rely on plant lists. It involves a relationship. And this relationship was highlighted so impactfully in the Eaton fire. This is Christmas Tree Lane. This is 2 blocks of deodar cedars. None of these trees are limbed up. All trees are touching trees. It's 2 blocks of one giant hedge of 50-foot deodar cedars. I would have said this block was a goner, but it wasn't. Not one tree or not one home was lost on these 2 blocks, despite the absolute destruction surrounding these 2 blocks. And the reason they survived? Love. Love. People showed up for those trees. Absolutely showed up because of the ritual of Christmas. Those trees become lit up in December. There's no dead, dying, or diseased wood in those trees. All diseases are fought. All pests are combated. They are provided water, nutrients. What these 2 blocks did was care for their elders, and ultimately, their elders cared for them. Love and attention. That is the thing we need in fire country. So, whether you're rich or poor, homeowner or renter, there's things we can all do. Remove the dead, dying, and diseased vegetation. Again, that's what turns a firebrand into something larger. Second, replace vegetation before it becomes an economic liability or fire risk. Gardeners are so big-hearted, we'll keep anything until it hurts us, until the tree falls on our house. We need to get ahead of that. We need to be like fire and rejuvenate and regenerate our landscapes. And please, especially during winter, the most important irrigation season is in winter. California natives don't need, not all of them need summer water, but they all need winter water. And if the atmosphere is not going to provide it, we need to do that. And it's not a lot. This is not a big irrigation system. So a quick conclusion. This is the Woolsey fire. Again, I'm going to reiterate this. Designing is easy. The trick is creating an ethic of maintenance and care that will sustain this resilience through a generation. How do we do it? Right now, lean into what you can, protect what you can, start with the heart and work outwards. Fire protection essentially, at its most basic level, asks for one Saturday a month. And on that one Saturday, eaves are painted and irrigations systems are checked and dead material is swept up, but just one Saturday a month. So concentrate on controlling what we can on that one Saturday and start with your home and work outwards. Structures, 5 feet, landscape features, defensible space, access, and then plants. So I hope this helped somewhat to motivate people. And there you go. I'm going to turn it back over to Geneva.
Wow, thank you so much, Doug. There's so much I learned every time when I listen to your presentations. And I really love that you're really emphasizing maintenance and what we can do in our landscapes, not just to focus on plant lists, but to focus on, what we can do to maintain over time. And as everyone on here is thinking about what they can do, putting in a weekend, a day, every month, a year to focus on making your landscape more fire resilient. I know you might also be thinking about what you can do to make your landscape more sustainable and more water wise. And so we at East Bay Mud have a lot of programs to help you do just that. We actually offer rebates to do things like convert lawns to Waterwise landscapes. We also, if you don't know where to start, offer a rebate for a 2-hour consultation with a landscape designer. So someone can actually come out to your property and kind of help you think through what types of plants might work in your specific microclimate. We have rebates for irrigation upgrades, like taking your old irrigation timer and upgrading it with a smart model that will, adjust seasonally to the weather, not irrigate when it's raining, things like that, which can be really, really helpful. One of our most popular rebates is for flow meter devices, which can tell you your water use in real time and give you immediate alerts if you have a leak, which, over 25% of homes in our service area have at least one leak, usually a toilet. So those are super helpful and a great way to save water. Even if you're doing, some irrigation, some plants, and things that we all really want to see in our beautiful, resilient landscapes. For all of these, go onto our website, ebmud.com/rebates, and you can download the applications and learn more about the specific eligibility. And for most of our rebates, especially the landscape ones, you do have to apply before starting your project. So do go check it out and send in your application before you start anything. Go to the next slide. Beyond our rebates, we actually, we're doing a lot here at East Bay Mod. We have a ton of other resources too. So we do have a free Firescaping brochure that has been actually really popular. I'll put it in the chat, the link to this page, but it's ebmud.com/Firescape, and you can download this, and it has a whole local resource list to a lot of the groups and organizations in our service area that are working specifically on fire-related issues and firescaping. So I recommend that. You can download it, or we'll actually mail you a physical copy for free. We also on our website, ebmud.com/conservation, have tips for just about everything. I think when you leave this webinar, you'll be sent to that page, and there's things like really helpful plant lists and plant resources on ebmud.com/plants. I saw some great plant questions in the chat. We have, we'll point you towards like CalScape, which is the California Native Plant Society's plant search tool, where you can search for plants that are both waterwise and deer resistant. And I'm not sure if they have specific fire search criteria for the reasons that Doug said. It's, we want to be thinking more holistically around maintenance with our plants, but they're definitely a helpful place to start as you're working on upgrading and changing your landscapes. And then finally, on our website, there's also an online water use portal, which can be super helpful just to kind of understand your baseline water use year round. And if you have any questions about any of this, please do reach out to my team. Email us at waterconservation@ebmud.com. We also host a virtual office hours on Zoom every other Tuesday. So if you go to our website, you can also get the link to that. So you can just come on and chat with someone live if you'd like. So without further ado, we'll move right into questions. And kind of to kick it off as I get the questions in here, I had a question for you, Doug. My question is, you're definitely an expert in firescaping. You're also an expert in sustainable landscaping broadly. And I think there are a lot of dichotomy between the two things, but I think there are also a lot of synergies. And so I'm just curious what you think, like as Californians, what can we do to have landscapes that are both water-wise and ecologically friendly, but also, resilient to fire? Like, what do you think one thing we could do would be?
If there was one thing that there is, infinite shades of gray. As an adult, only old people and toddlers live in the world of black and white. To the rest of us, we have to manage the gray. And the most powerful thing I've seen from the survivors is a relationship with their property, is create plants that create a relationship to you, whatever that relationship be, whether it be pollinators or nutrition or cut flowers, but really cultivate a deep and meaningful relationship with those plants and the land. And you'll see that if you show up to protect it, it might show up to protect you. And this is the thing of this reciprocity, where you really engage in these deeper and more meaningful relationships with your land. You become part of it. You through your digestive system and your feelings of comfort. And it's really hard to explain that, but the properties that I've seen survive have a deep relationship. And they show up. They show up to provide care and attention. And ultimately, that's what's going to protect us, is this showing up, this care and attention. That was a
Yeah,
really
that
good
makes
question.
Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense to me, Doug. And I really like that you're emphasizing it is that care and attention that is really so important as we're thinking about our landscapes broadly. So kind of I'm looking at the questions, and I'm seeing a lot of questions about specific plants. I see questions specifically about our, what do you think about ivy, manzanita, mulch, which is not a plant, but and ceanothus were specifically called out as like, do you have any thoughts on those? So again, that was ivy, manzanitas, ceanothus, and
I
I'll
do.
hold off. We can talk about mulch
I
after
do.
that,
No,
since
no,
that's a whole other
ivy,
topic.
here again, it's maintenance. If ivy is well maintained and it doesn't have that deep, thick thatch, so every other year you're going and you're mowing it down to 2 inches and letting that new big succulent growth come out, highly fire resistant. I have seen ivy survive fire really well. On the other hand, when it's built up over 10 years and you have that massive, that rat habitat underneath that deep, then you've got a problem. Manzanita, phenomenal. If you can keep it clean, boy, it is one tough, rugged plant. Again, Manzanita, though, doesn't like as much, from my experience. I know we have a lot of experts here. It doesn't like urban conditions as much as we would hope. So they can be a little short-lived, and that goes with ceanothus too. Ceanothus is a rock star, highly fire resistant, but it just tends to be a little, in my experience, only a little shorter lived in urban conditions. And again, urban soils are different than wildland soils. They tend to be more acidic, they tend to have less oxygen, and they tend to have more nutrients. And to a native plant that has not evolved to a lot of nutrients, this will speed them up through their life cycle a little bit faster. So see, all these plants are great, but again, it's this replacement and this knowing when that plant has to move on and be renewed. And this is that care. You're just showing up to be conscientious of the welfare of that plant. And
Yeah.
mulch. Mulch. Want to talk about a fraught subject. Wow. Yeah, the city of Malibu has outlawed any woody mulches within 500 feet of a structure. Grace Slick lost her home to a mulch fire in the late 1990s in Corte Madera. Uh, you know, but so there mulch poses a risk during fire weather and critical times of the year. But all the other times of year, they're providing an immense amount of benefit, right? They're reducing weeds, they're providing nutrients, not that our native soils need that. Um, and they're reducing maintenance costs. They're allowing the soil to hold more moisture. Um, Wood is incredible. Wood doesn't absorb solar radiation. So actually having a wood mulchy cover over the soil actually keeps the soil cooler, keeps outside temperatures cooler. So there's all these year-round benefits of mulch. But boy, that 1 week a year or those 2 weeks a year, it becomes this incredible liability. And so this is that gray. How do we manage it? Well, the way I manage it is I just push it a little further off the structure. And if I'm going to use organic nutrients, real natural organic materials, I'll work with humus. So I have a compost pile in my house, and I would just dig it up, get that black gold, that really rich humus, and that's what I would use to nourish the plants closer to my structure. And then as we move out, we're getting into resistance, right? We can't stop all fires. We get into more resistance, and that's where the woody mulches and where I really want to suppress some of the most obnoxious weeds, the broom, the black mustard and whatnot. And I would use mulch to do that. So, we can't stop all fires. Again, this presentation was focused on saving the house and protecting the family. And we're going to, no matter what, in every event, you're going to have fires, but it doesn't mean it has to take down our homes. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I did see one of the questions about ceanothus said specifically, what do you think in the first 5 feet? And from what you were saying, it sounds like really we don't want flammable materials in the first five
But
feet
ceanothus
from the
isn't
fire.
flammable. Yeah. Ceanothus isn't flammable. So if
Oh,
you espalier ceanothus or it's just a low ground cover like point raise, I think it would be fine. It doesn't have dead material. It's got moist, bendable leaves. If it's, again, maintained, it's your relationship with the plant that's ultimately going to determine whether or not that plant goes up.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for clarifying that for me.
I don't know
Now it
if I
makes
did
sense.
that.
Um, let's see. I see so many good questions coming in. Okay, I have one that's a little bit more towards landscaping generally. It says, I installed drip irrigation and re-landscape, but my mature trees are now suffering. Can you give me a resource for how much water using drip, how much water my trees basically should be getting and how to determine if they're having enough
Yeah, so that
irrigation?
drip, so here's the thing with drip is you're emitting a half a gallon an hour or something like that is really low, or half a gallon a minute, or it's just incredibly low. And a tree will respirate hundreds of gallons a day. And so to replenish that, you really need to have that drip irrigation system on sometimes 6 to 7 hours. And That sounds like a lot, but the thing is, it is a deep penetration. It's not this horizontal movement of water. When you're dripping, it's really going down into the roots. And so you get this lasting water that really sits underneath the tree. And if you use drip and if you irrigate for 8 hours or 6 hours or something like that, you don't have to water again for 3 weeks. That's the power of drip because it is such a deep penetrating water. But the trick is leaving it on for that length of time. People really struggle. I grow a lot of trees to cool my garden, and they really, I've calculated they're respirating up to 200, 300 gallons a day during the height of summer. And I don't have to replenish all that water, but I try to replenish half of it. So I'll let the soil dry to 6 inches, maybe 5 inches, and then have my irrigation refill that 5 or 6 inches. And if I'm using the lowest possible drip, I would have that on for really hours. But any decent irrigation store will help you calculate what's the transpiration rate of your vegetation and how long you need to run your system based on the output of your nozzle. Um, so Hydroscape is an outlet that's up there that's really good, and they would just go in there and ask the guys, and they'll really help you set that up.
Yeah, and I also put in the chat ebmud.com/save outdoors, which is a lot of different irrigation tips. And we have a really helpful irrigation guide that is a good starting place. I recommend kind of consulting with it with your plant type and irrigation type, and then, adjusting from there, since it's not, of course, a one size fits all solution, but it's a good
Right.
starting place. And with that, we're actually have reached our time. Um, Thank you all so much for being such engaged participants tonight and asking such good questions, for really showing up. We had a lot of people online, and I think it shows just how important of a topic this is. So huge thanks to Doug Kent for being our guest speaker tonight. You are a fantastic speaker. I learned a lot. I chuckled. So thank you again. And for everyone else, we really hope to see you at our next Water Wednesday webinar. It's always the third Wednesday of the month. Next webinar is actually going to focus on emergency preparedness. So really kind of continuing this topic and what you can do for at home for your family to be prepared for large emergencies and natural disasters. So we hope to see you at the next one, and tune in to ebmud.com/Water Wednesday to sign up for that and to see this recording a week from now. So thank you all
Thank
and
you,
have a great night.
Geneva. You rock.
Bye.
All right. Talk soon.